thing about Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom. I have no backstory or connection to this album at all. I can't even lean on a previous knowledge of Soft Machine or Matching Mole. Don't have any. Nope. Going into this one almost completely blind.
I think it's important to note that Robert Wyatt was one of a number of seminal Canterbury personalities, along with the likes of Hugh Hopper, Kevin Ayers, Steve Hillage, Richard Sinclair, Mike Ratledge, and of course the one and only god of Canterbury keyboards, Dave Stewart.
I'm inferring from Sean's discussion of the Canterbury scene that I should expect more improvisation than in most prog rock, which is exciting.
There are some that say that improv is best left out of the hands of rock musicians, but I believe it was Bill Bruford that said that once.
Also, given that side 1 ends with a song called Little Red Riding Hood Hit the Road, and side 2 ends with a song called Little Red Robin Hood Hit the Road, I guess I can see some evidence of that referenced whimsy. I used to play bass for referenced whimsy. Looking through the album credits, I see Mike Oldfield, I see Fred Frith. Definitely a fan of Fred Frith. I once watched a Fred Frith solo guitar concert broadcast on a French language arts channel out of The Hague. He was doing things like weaving spoons in between his guitar strings and pouring cornflakes on the instrument. Precisely up my alley. I also see that the album is produced by Pink Floyd's Nick Mason, who is credited with one of my all-time favorite quotes about music. A band is made up of a drummer, a bass player, and assorted novelty acts. Continuing with the credits, I see there is a person on here playing bass clarinet and tenor sax named Gary Window. That's fabulous. Blow, Window, blow! But, I think that might be all I have for a backstory. Sorry. Tell them the thing. Oh, yeah, okay. So, my dad used to own a recording studio. It's just outside of Tallahassee called Pegasus Studios. The first commercially released album recorded at Pegasus was Pattern Disruptive by the Dickie Betts Band, which featured future Allman Brothers members Warren Haynes and Johnny Neal. Well, the first song on that album was called Rock Bottom, which really doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it's the only other connection that came to my mind. So I guess it's time to spin Rock Bottom already. Gracious, this is an odd little beastie. From the first word, from the first chord, there's no doubting this is British music. Kind of. It feels British, but it also feels off. I don't know entirely how to explain it. Maybe this is music from the England in the universe next door, because everything feels as if it's just a few degrees out of plumb. The album as a whole sounds as if it was meant to be the soundtrack for a Wallace and Gromit animation, but one directed by Jan Svankmajer. There are large swaths of improvisation all throughout this album, but none of them feel like what you would normally hear in a jazz context. These long stretches of solos feel like you're witnessing something that shouldn't exist. Okay, so imagine you're sitting in your kitchen, staring out your back window, and watching as a bright green day-glow two-headed weasel cavorts and gambles through the backyard. Like that. I wish I knew how to explain what I'm hearing without resorting to surrealist imagery. Well, okay, let's look at the songs individually. Sea Song. It's fitting that this song includes references to being drunk, although I am reminded of a passage from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the bit where Ford Prefect is warning Arthur Dent about what it's like to go through hyperspace.
It's rather unpleasantly like being drunk.
What's so wrong about being drunk?
Ask a glass of water.
Not that the song is unpleasant. It's just a bit creepy.
Check out the Tears for Fears song called I Believe. It was written by Roland Orzabal and dedicated to Robert. The B-side of the single is Orzabal performing Sea Song.
The song ends with "Your lunacy fits nicely with my own, my very own. We're not alone." Followed by 2 full minutes of meandering vocal improv, which sounds odd when I say it out loud, but it's honestly quite lovely. And the chords go like this. Partly fish, partly porpoise, partly baby sperm whale. And then there's another bit of vocal improv in the second tune, A Last Straw, a literal wah-wah solo. That is, The solo section is Robert Wyatt actually singing wah 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 wah. Little Red Riding Hood hit the road. It took me a while to figure out that there's some odd meter going on at the beginning of this song. The opening trumpet fanfare over the chugging kind of birdland groove completely masks the fact that the meter in that section is 9/8. And the fact that that layered trumpet fanfare goes on in the background throughout the entire song is kind of a drone. Novel to say the least. Combine that with some tape reversal bits, a weirdly modulating set of chords. Never heard a song that has this kind of texture before. Ali Phoebe. The first 3 minutes of this is a string solo kind of a thing. I don't know who's playing it or even what instrument it is, quite honestly. I wish I knew, because I want to know what technique they were using to make those blurred trills. And then the vocals come in, and things get really weird. I can't forsake you, or forsqueak you. Ali Fee my larder. Ali Fee my larder. Dude, are you okay? And the weirdness kind of segues directly into the next song, which quickly becomes a deconstruction of the themes established in Ali Phoebe. The piano and the pound percussion bursting frantic noise. While the squeaky speedy sax man gets so squeaky. Squeak, squeak goes saxy man. Do you know what you sound like right now? Jammy jars and mustard. I'm not sure.
Lolly when it's a fall. I'm not your larder.
I'm sorry, hold on a second. I think he needs a reboot. Oh, sorry about that. Why do I taste copper? Okay, so the last song, Little Red Robin Hood hit the road. Now, despite the fact that the first half of this song has the highest energy level of anything that appears on this album, it still feels subdued. And then the second half goes completely round, as they say, the bend. Think Outside the Wall from the end of The Wall, or Good Night at the end of the White Album. After the first listen, I don't know if I found something unique and brilliant, or something putting on a facade of oddness solely as an affectation. Either way, it's strangely compelling, if creepy. I'm going to have to dole this one out carefully over the coming week. Holy smoke, you guys. What have I stepped into? As I said before, this is my first exposure to anything Robert Wyatt. And apparently, the album serving as my introduction to his work is the first album he made after falling from a fourth-story window.
About that accident, it was June 1973, and Robert was at a party at Jilly Smith of Gong's house. And he got pretty inebriated and somehow fell out of a fourth-story window, basically breaking his spine. And that basically put an end to his drumming career, although he did continue to play a sort of jazzy style with his hands alone. As you know, this album was produced by Pink Floyd drummer Nick Mason, and Pink Floyd did a benefit concert for Robert to raise money for his medical bills shortly after that.
So for those of you that are already fans of Soft Machine or Matching Mole, please try and put yourself into my situation. Imagine that the first time you know there's even such a person as Robert Wyatt is your first spin of Rock Bottom. And the second thing you know about him is that he broke his back just before he made this album. Because here's the thing. I didn't know if what I was hearing on Rock Bottom is Robert Wyatt processing his trauma, or if the rest of his work is similarly askew.
This album, Rock Bottom, was actually begun before his accident. While I think some of the lyrics took on a darker tone after it occurred, this music was already in the works before this happened. And I think you'll see a connection with some of his more whimsical works prior and after.
I had to break my usual protocol just a bit. So in addition to listening to Rock Bottom this week, I also listened to a couple albums by Soft Machine, third and fourth, and a couple by Matching Mole, the debut and Little Red Record. I wanted to hear the kind of music he was making just before he recorded Rock Bottom. The two albums I heard from Soft Machine were largely British fusion, but ensemble fusion. I like them both quite a bit.
There was a band in 1966 called the Wildflowers, W-I-L-D-E. And this is a group that basically split and became two different groups. It became Soft Machine and it became Caravan. Robert Wyatt was invited to join Soft Machine when the Wildflowers split, along with Mike Radledge. And of course, they joined and did some amazing work. The numbered albums that they did were some of the best and went some interesting places. It started with kind of the whimsical Canterbury-esque poppy meets jazz blend. And then by the third one, it's almost just straight jazz improv.
The one tune I heard on those two albums that reminded me most of what I hear on Rock Bottom was Moon in June from Third, the only tune with vocals, and the only one credited to Robert Wyatt for songwriting. So I guess that makes some sense. Awful lot of fusion in Matching Mole as well, but they take things further out than Soft Machine. In fact, there were times in Matching Mole that reminded me of Hampton Grease Band, especially the big jam section on the song Part of the Dance from their first album. So yes, there was evidence of the odd instrumental and vocal choices previous to Rock Bottom, but then again, Rock Bottom seems to me to have a decidedly dark turn.
That said, surprisingly, he also put out a single of a cover of a Monkees tune, which I believe was written by Neil Diamond originally, called I'm a Believer. Turns out he got into a bit of an argument with the producers of Tops of the Pops. They didn't think it was appropriate for him to appear in a wheelchair. And they went round and round about it, and in the end, Robert won. And it went to number 29 in the UK charts. Not bad for a prog guy.
Rock Bottom feels simultaneously expansive and lonely. Adrift at sea, maybe. And after listening to Robert Wyatt's previous work, and then re-listening to Rock Bottom, man, it pains me to say this, but the absence of a full drum set was noticeable. And that made me even sadder than the music was doing on its own. In the final analysis, I like this album. It fills an emotional niche that until now, I hadn't even realized was there.
If you're a fan of Rock Bottom, I highly suggest checking out his previous album as well. It's called End of an Ear, and the following one called Ruth is Stranger Than Richard. Throughout the 70s, he guested with a number of different groups, including Henry Cow, Hatfield in the North, Carla Bley, Brian Eno, Michael Mantler, and Roxy music guitarist Phil Manzanera, who plays on one of my favorite Phil albums. It's called Diamond Head. More recently, you could see him on Remember That Night from David Gilmour in his live band. About 10 years ago, Robert drops in and plays some very earnest flugelhorn on it, or cornet, one or the other, I forget. But as a rule, he retired from performing in the mid-2000s and recording as well. He felt like he wanted to get out of the game before age started to take its toll.
I already know for certain that there's going to be times in my life when Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom is the only album that's going to fit. Times when I feel disconnected. Times when I feel I'm required to put on the face of stoicism, when all I want to do is allow myself to be cared for, or even just understood. Yes, it's odd, and more than a little crazy making, but it's also deeply affecting, and at its heart quite tender.